Hi all, it's Les Posen, clinical psychologist, FlightWise, Fear of Flying. I hope you're doing well. Here in Melbourne, it's the beginning of spring. As I record this session, we're just a couple of days into spring. Days are starting to warm up a little bit. You guys, of course, in the Northern Hemisphere are heading into your fall or your autumn. Things are topsy-turvy. We're coming towards the end of our school year. You're just starting your school year. It's interesting, isn't it, when you make that transition? Anyway, I want to make mention to you that a lot of the ideas for these sessions that I do, where I share some ideas and some knowledge with you, often come from something that was said during a session with a patient. And it just pops out, and I thought, as I'm saying it to my patient, gosh, that would make a nice title for a nice set of ideas for a session like this. Recently, one of the things I said to someone was, in terms of what their experience was on board the plane, the uncomfortable sensations they were experiencing, the yucky thoughts and the tension, behaviours, whatever else. And I said to them, well, they're for you quite normal behaviours and quite normal thoughts, but they're really unnecessary. And I want to make that distinction between what's normal, but is it really necessary? So that we can shift to maybe a new normal. Which gets me to say to you about, what does normal mean? Well, as a psychologist, we spend a lot of time talking about normal, but maybe not quite in the way that you might think. Let me elaborate upon this just quickly. 50 years ago, I commenced my training in psychology as an undergraduate in 1974 at this university here. That's Monash University in Melbourne. I did my undergraduate there, my first year of postgrad, before swapping over for my master's at the University of Melbourne, not too far away. And that's where I graduated in order to become a registered psychologist. That is, I could practice in 1983. And then some roughly 10 years later, I upgraded my skills and became board certified in clinical psychology, and that's what I've been doing for the last more than 30 years. In that very first year, 1974, I learned to understand this concept of normal. And that's because I did 2 units in Psych 101, and if you've done Psych 101, you'll be aware of these units. One of them is on statistics and probability, and the other was on abnormal psychology. There's that word normal, but now we preface it by saying abnormal. There's something a little amiss here. Normal, when it comes to statistics, came from sometimes I think people would say the field of astronomy, where people trying to make predictions as to where certain planets and stars would be, and understanding that there was an error always attached to those predictions, and that the predictions followed what's called a normal curve. That normal curve is also known as a Gaussian curve, named after the German mathematician and scientist and philosopher and astronomer who began to describe these probabilities of certain events happening. Let me show you what a normal distribution looks like. We'll pull it up here. There we go. And I'll get myself out of the way, just pop myself down here in the corner so you can see. So this bell shape is also called a normal distribution. That middle section where 68% of a population lies is what's called one standard deviation away from the center, which is the average or the mean as it's called. And then as you see, as you get further and further away from that mean, you get less and less percentages. So can you see right next to me where it says 2.1%? This is the small area here above the average. Well, if you want to apply to become a Mensa member, high IQ, you would need to score an IQ test within this region here, in the top 2.1% of the population. That's who gets into Mensa. Most universities, to get into university, you have to be in these 2 blue regions here, the 34% and the 13% region. Some people would say PhDs are around here somewhere. So there you go, that's a normal distribution. Let me show you that there are lots of things in nature that follow this pattern of a normal distribution. Have a look and you'll see just what I'm talking about. So have a look here. Distribution of newborn weights of babies in pounds along the horizontal. Height is another one of those things in nature where it follows this sort of normal distribution. 5'9" is the average. Shoe size in the United States, average for, I think for men probably, is a size 10. School scores also follows this distribution, spreads out norm, or the average is here. Have a look at this NFL retirement age. Average looks to be 33, but then it spreads out. I've got one more. Blood pressure. Here's where we start to use normal to mean what's healthy. And now Nobel Prize winners, the average is around about 60. It spreads out, very few under 40, and not many still who get their Nobel Prizes aged 80. So the norm is around 60. You've got to be in your field for roughly almost 40 years before you can expect to get a Nobel Prize. So that's the normal curve. It's a statistical thing. Averages, spreads. In abnormal psychology, we are also looking at spreads, but it's actually much more distinct, as in normal, abnormal. There's not that much variation in between. It doesn't really spread out that much. And so what I want to describe to you is that some of the behaviors that you might be emitting in a plane, the thoughts, the feelings, the behaviors, the emotions, might for you be quite normal, but they're not necessary to have, and they're worthwhile to work on changing and establishing a new normal. Okay, let me make sure you understand that. Just because you emit a behavior or have a thought doesn't mean it should be your normal, even though it's the one that frequently occurs. It frequently occurs because you've learned for it to be this way. The fact that you didn't actually sit down and study to be this way, and the fact that it happens naturally or normally, doesn't mean it's unbendable and unshiftable. When people come to see me, we go through, well, what are the normal things that you do? What are the things, not average, what are the normal things that you do when you contemplate doing a flight, or when someone says, hey, I've won a prize, come with me on a holiday with me. Lucky if you can get it. What do? Do you immediately slink away and say, oh, how do I get out of this? Or do you agree because you don't want to say no and then find a way out of it? No. You want to find a new normal, a new way of doing things. That new normal needs to be totally incompatible with the old normal, so that there is no choice here. Okay, the old normal, you have to be able to say bye-bye, whatever you did for me, thanks very much, but basically your use-by date is up. This device should no longer be displayed on the shelf. New products are coming. Let's get rid of it. And you need to establish some new behaviors. The easiest one I want you to start to think about is the language that you use to describe both what you experience and the things to do with aviation. So, for instance, the thing above me, the what we call the jetway or the aero bridge, one of these is actually a copyrighted name. It's not just a generic term, it's a brand name. Rather than looking and saying, oh, I'm going to walk down that tunnel into that tube, I want to suggest to you that once you start to use that language, your threat response center in your brain is very sensitive to what language you use. It's called the limbic system. Within the limbic system are the little nuggets that look like an almond called the amygdala, hyper-connected areas of the brain, and they'll pick up on your language. So if you start to use words which for human beings have historically been very threatening things to describe, a tunnel, a tube, I'm going to be shut in, you're going to trigger very long-held evolutionary primed threats. Not healthy. You've got to start to change it. Use the real terms. I'm going to walk down the aero bridge and get myself into 10A by the window, 10C by the aisle, wherever it might be. Start to use the right nomenclature. That also applies to the people that you meet. There's ground staff, there's cabin crew, there's the tech crew. Start to use the real terms that aviation people use. maybe one of the most important changes of language I want you to think about as our starting point. I'll follow this up in other things in terms of behaviours later on. If you've been to see my other videos, you'll know I've described behaviours that you can do which are incompatible with the old behaviours. Today I'm just focusing for a moment on your self-expressions. But one of the other ones is if you say to yourself, I get scared, I get anxious, I get worried. I want to suggest to you that over many years of usage, your amygdala grabs onto that and says, oh, into threat response we go. It then starts to produce lots of physical sensations. Heart starts beating faster, sweaty palms, choky sensations, all perfectly normal if you are confronted with a true threat and you must make a rapid move to escape that threat. It may turn out later to be a false alarm, but right in the heat of the moment, your amygdala will work really hard to join up the dots and say, looks like it, smells like it, sounds like it, feels like it is. Even if later on you discover false alarm. It happens to all of us. Okay? So what would be the alternative to anxiety? I feel anxious, I feel scared, I feel threatened. If we know we ought not to be, because I know flying is so safe, as many people tell me, then rather than I get really anxious, I want you to use the expression, I have a momentary loss of composure. And my task is to get my act together by focusing on what's the right thing to do and to say to myself. We're going to follow this up a little bit more, but I just want you to get started. Start this week. Start to monitor how often you or others around you use words like, oh, I get scared, I get fearful, I get frightened. And see if you can stop that and say, well, I wonder what the trigger is for you to have a momentary loss of composure where you're not able to think straight and work out what is it precisely that I'm under threat with? What is it precisely that I need to do in the situation? And clearly, doing the right thing, which might mean throwing out the old stuff and replacing it with new, yet to be familiar stuff, which will require practice to become your new normal, is the way to go. I'll talk more about this in a future video. I hope we've got started. Make some comments down below, write some questions, and I'll help you out a little bit if I can. For now, enjoy the fall, enjoy the spring, and I'll catch you another time. Bye for now.